Now, allow me to transfer the responsibility of moderating the next session to Mihai Constantin, who will moderate our debate. I wish you success, Mihai, in dealing with 5 different European parties willing to build 5 different futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Let's hope we'll have 6 European parties if we can find Mrs. Tomic. Is she in the hall? Maybe she didn't hear us, hear the invitation to come on stage.
She came, but
anyway,
we don't find the 6.
I'll take you up on something you said at the opening remarks. If something goes wrong, if I do something wrong, please blame Mrs. Crețu. And also, we are live on Romanian National Television, where I have the honor to work for so many years, as Madam President mentioned before. So please do not plunge my ratings in the morning. And let's have a lively and nice debate starting right now. I'll do a short presentations for those on stage, and then we hear a couple of statements from every member of the European group represented here. And then we have a very nice and lively, I hope, debate on so many issues. Because I think the President of the Senate raised the issue how often national audiences really interact consistently with the European agenda. Not even in the European elections campaigns, unfortunately. So, Mr. Siegfried Mureșan, spokesman of the European People's Party. Next is Mr. Bas Eickhout, Vice President and leading candidate of the Greens European Free Alliance. Then is Mrs. Renate Weber from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Then we salute Mr. Victor Boștinaru, Vice President of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. And last but not least, Monsieur Nicolas Bay, Co-President and leading candidate for the European Nations and Freedom. Also, I'm not revealing this right now, but you should know this information. We have some Spitzenkandidaten among us, and their speech should be even more interesting than the others. But in the order of the size in the European Parliament, I invite Mr. Mureșan to take the floor first.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome here to this beautiful hall in the Romanian Parliament. Bună dimineața, doamnelor, domnilor, dragi oaspeți.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests of the other member states of the EU, welcome to the Palace of Parliament here in Bucharest. I think we chose the best moment, the organizers thought about it, this best moment to talk about the future of the EU. What has happened since the most recent parliamentary elections and what we managed to achieve there in the parliament together with you, the national parliaments and the member states in the last 5 years, and what we intend to do in the coming 5 years. The first thing to say is that in the last 10 years, the European Union had to survive through massive crises, the financial global crisis of 2008-2010, and then the crisis of the refugees 2015-2016. None of these 2 crises were triggered by the European Union themselves, but both crises had an impact on us, affected us, and in both crises, people looked up to the EU for solutions. The financial economic crisis came from the USA, and the migration and refugee crisis was because of the instability around the EU. We assessed carefully and we analyzed the reasons of the 2 crises, trying to understand them step by step, because what I would like to say is that there are no miraculous solutions. There is no silver bullet that could lead to a solution for the complex reasons why the 2 crises started. In the case of the economic and financial crisis, we were faced with the fact that some member states of the EU had a too high level of debt. The level of productivity was too low. the reforms were too slow, and the single currency euro had to become stronger. We started working on all these, and we managed to design a stability mechanism that could help any state in difficulty. And each European state starting 2008 was supported and helped. So the solidarity amongst the member states, amongst the citizens, worked fully. And the aid, of course, was conditioned in the sense that measures had to be adopted in order to help the countries overcome those difficulties. We set up a stability mechanism which currently we wish to extend with robust European monetary funds, so that whenever there will be an economic crisis, all states will be supported. And I am glad to announce that 2 weeks ago, following a proposal I made, an amendment that I introduced, this European Monetary Fund that will start operating in the coming years will be open to states outside of the Eurozone. Initially, it was designed only for the Eurozone, but we had the support of the Social Democrats. The Greens supported us also. So the fund will be open to the states outside of the Eurozone, those who want to be involved in decision-making. So unity within the EU. We've adopted measures in order to strengthen the banking system, encouraging the states to make reforms, increase the level of competitiveness and productivity.
We have set up the Juncker Plan. This new financial tool aimed to encourage the private sector to invest. There were generated more than 200 billion euros in investments and created more than 300,000 jobs in the European Union following this mechanism. And we decided after this to extend the objective that until 2020 to generate 500 billion euros investments in the European economy. These measures functioned very well, and we have now in the European Union the 7th year of continuous growth, and the rate of unemployment at the level of the entire EU is at a historical minimum since collecting data, only 6.5%. The same with the crisis of migration and refugees. We didn't have a magical solution. We had multiple causes as such. The only thing functioning is to address and to come with solutions for these causes. It's obvious that people did not leave their origin countries because they had a good life, but on the contrary, they had a bad life because they lacked water, education, health services, and the safety and security. That's why we have to invest in the immediate neighborhood of EU. Africa is a continent where population gets doubled each 20 years. On the African continent, we had 300 million euros, 600 in the 90s, 1.2 billion in 2010, and the prognosis is that until 2030 in Africa there will be 2.5 billion people. So it's clear we have a responsibility regarding this continent, and we have to contribute to the improvement of the conditions of life there. External border security of EU is also a project to which we dedicated in the last years, and we will continue to dedicate. We will extend the European agency Frontex. We will make it become a real border and coast police with 10,000 officers in the next years, because in order to be able to travel free within the EU member states, a protection of the external border is essential. We have to know who comes in the European Union, where from, where does he go, and if the people comply with the conditions to enter in the European Union to fight terrorism. A better cooperation between the member states of the European Union in the sense of a better exchange of information regarding security risks. This is what we will do. This is what my political family proposes to do for the next 5 years, to solve the problems and to deliver what the citizens expect from the European Union. First of all, prosperity and the safety of the citizens. In order to be able to deliver prosperity in a global economy, in a world continuously changing, it's obvious that we have to invest in research, innovation, digitalization, infrastructure, and the candidate of our political family, the candidate of our European People's Party, Mr. Manfred Weber, our leader in the European Parliament, proposes and commits to create 5 million jobs in the European Union in the following 5 years, coming from different directions, to use at maximum the potential of the internal market, to complete and to finalize this internal market, including the digital area, in order to be able to transport, import, export the products, sell them without any kind of restrictions in any corner of the European Union. The second source for the creation of jobs is the cohesion policy. And here in Romania and for many member states, it is essential. But I want to emphasize the following thing. Following the cohesion policy of the European Union, we all benefit in the European Union. All the member states of the European Union, a cohesion policy investing in infrastructure, digital, energetic infrastructure, aim to create new jobs and to reduce the gaps between the areas of EU. And the third source of creating jobs are commercial agreements between the European Union and states or region outside the European Union. Commercial agreements, of course, with the compliance of high-quality standards that the products that have to reach the consumers have to comply with. Getting closer to the conclusion, I think we all have the obligation and the task to defend the European values. The conviction of my political family is that the power of the European Union lies in the rules that we have given and in the compliance of these rules. So we will not avoid to get involved for the compliance of the state of law in each member state where are problems, to address them, including within our political family. We have weaknesses, we didn't hide them, and we address them to comply with the European Union values, freedom, democracy. These are things that people are waiting for us. We will use all the tools available for the European Union to implement and respect the values, and if these values prove to be insufficient in front of a new flow, we will not hesitate to create new tools. It is understood that we will approach the young people, where I want to say just two things. 65% of the young people attending today the first class will graduate jobs that do not exist today. So it's clear that we have an education system in which the young people have to assume abilities for jobs that do not exist today, but for sure they will have to perform during their life. The second thing, more than 2/3 of the employers appreciate international experience of young people today. So young people from any member state have to be aware that they will work together with young people from Portugal, Bulgaria, Latvia, Spain, Romania, as we have here in Romania, young people from Timișoara, Cluj, or also in Spain, people from Barcelona, Madrid, and so on, or Valencia. That's why we will invest in Erasmus grants, helping the young people to know better Europe and to defend it and to work with success in the European Union. I will stop here. I will be available to answer to your questions. Once again, welcome in Romania and in the Parliament of Romania. Thank you.
for this very nice roundup of our European challenges and European fears, I might add. Let's see how we will address these challenges in the near future. I invite now Mr. Victor Boștinaru, Vice President on the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, to take the floor.
Bună ziua!
Hello, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, deputies, your excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished friends. Soon, in Sibiu, the European Summit Council will have to decide over the future of our union. When I say our, I use it in the most personal meaning and the most direct meaning, because the European Union has been and has to stay a project of our nation states composing the European Union, especially of the citizens that will be called to decide over the future. Thus, what kind of union? How will our union look like after the summit in Sibiu? That will have to decide over the future architecture and the strategic directions of the European Union. It is obvious that the option of the 5 scenarios, the options of these 5 scenarios so debated, remain still directly or indirectly on the agenda of this summit. But in the same extent as Romanian, pro-European Romanian, a social democrat, I want to truly believe that any of the 5 will have to be adopted in Sibiu, but a 6th one able to address to the European project in the sense of the European construction based on all member states, a project able to relaunch solidarity and unity of the European Union, not just in nice statements with election feature, but in the practice of the European Union after the European elections. And I'm thinking of the restatement as a fundamental value of unity in this summit from Sibiu. I am thinking of the fact that this summit will have to decide and to practice the idea of deepening the integration of European Union. There is no alternative for the deepening of the integrity of the European Union, but this deepening of this integrity of this process will have to address to all those who want to be involved when forms of cooperation belong to the decisions of member states like PESCO or Eurozone or Schengen. They have to exclude explicitly and imperatively double standards, to exclude the movement targets us Romanians, Croatians, Bulgarians. We have our story with Schengen that became like an illusion. As much as you achieve the assumed objectives, targets, some member states were saying that it wasn't enough and we had to do something more. This option should be excluded, at least in order to prevent the deepening of frustrations and to increase these elements of against Europe. And we have to decide that Eurozone will be open explicitly and clearly, irrevocably, to all member states willing to access, with an elementary condition to have applied the same criteria as to the member states, the states willing to have access to the debates of Eurozone. And yes, from here, from Bucharest, we have to say something. The idea, the option of a so-called Parliament of Eurozone it's the best solution to deepen the frustrations, the misunderstandings, and it should be excluded because you cannot have a European Union with two parliaments, one parliament of all Europeans and a parliament of Eurozone. When we do this, this division will be guaranteed. And I would like to add something more. We should prevent the hegemony attempts, I repeat, visible in the action and intervention of some of states of the European Union. If this will be achieved, of course, it depends on the summit and of the European leaders attending the summit. But I believe that the European Parliament and the European parliaments have the obligation to control the decision of our leaders in order to assure that there we will take the right decisions that the European citizens from Romania, France, Germany, Spain, all the others need in order for their project to go on. Then, if this will happen, and I'm extremely glad that my political group came with a proposal, explicit proposal that is a synthesis, I could say improved and developed, of the fifth option, doing better together. Let's do things better and together. I repeat, together, not separately. Let's discuss some of the political directions that this summit will have to decide, because the future of the European Union, of our European Union, depend on them. We will have the most risky elections, taking into account that more than 30% of the members of the future European Parliament to belong to some political forces or structures newly created, having a political type with attitude against Europe or even extremist or nationalist. Then the cohabitation will be more complicated between no two, like we had PPE and SND, but three, in order to guarantee stability in the European Union and European Parliament, which are the things that, in my perspective, could change the perspective of the European citizens. First and important discussion, and last week was adopted a considerable package in this direction, is what we call fair or just taxation. It's about to introduce, finally, regulations at European level in order to prevent what is called tax avoidance or fiscal optimization, or really registering in legislation and jurisdiction extremely favorable of the big companies, doing that the principle that should be elementary and simple, the tax on profit to be paid in the state where the company has acquired the profit, to not to exist today. This is a big factor of lack of trust of the European citizens, and we should all shake hands to do this. A second important thing is an explicit guarantee in the agreement of Sibiu of a financial multi-annual framework able to assure the necessary resources, not just for the cohesion policy, but I underline the fact that some states that do not contribute flirt with the idea of the reduction of the contributions to the budget of the European Union. But now we have obligations that we have committed, the protection of the external border, as my colleague, Mr. Siegfried Mureșan, was mentioning, the Frontex, the policy of defense of the European Union, all need resources, and it's not strange that the countries from the European policy cohesion are ready to increase the contributions at the budget of EU, and other states are extremely reluctant, including using the explanation, in my opinion, easily politician, of the effects of Brexit. Going on, continuing what my colleague was saying, the European surveys show as it follows. From each euro with which Germany contributes to the budget of the European Union, I quote from a distinguished and prestigious politician from Netherlands. No, it's not my discovery. This euro returns in different forms in Germany at around 1.7 euros. Each euro contributed by the Netherlands to the EU returns only with 1.32 or 34 euro cents. The cohesion policy, dear friends, is a win-win policy for the net contributors, but also for the states in the policy of cohesion, because the effects producing the economic effects, and by contracts consulting from the states receiving funds from the cohesion policy, contribute to the development and reduction of gaps of development. Finally, I would conclude with a remark regarding the policy of defense. Europe is living today the most complicated equation of defense and security, at least from 1968, since 1968. It's essential that at the summit of Sibiu and the future action of the EU to restate clearly and explicitly and irrevocably that the defense of Europe is complementary to NATO, NATO remaining the only provider of hard security and territorial defense for the member states of EU.
Our policy will be interoperable with NATO, and it is compatible with NATO. We should exclude the possibility that now, as we start building a defense policy, anyone might think of a possible gap appearing between us and the United States, or an overlapping with the powers entrusted to NATO. Euro is faced with real security issues on the eastern border, and I'm thinking of the brutal intervention of Russia, the illegal occupation of Crimea, and this security challenge is a long-term challenge. Europe needs to find an answer for itself, for its citizens, to all these security issues. And now, as regards trade, it's an honor for me to share with you this piece of information. These last 5 years were fruitful in the new approach to a commercial policy. But we should keep one thing in mind. Europe cannot live in a splendid isolation, self-excluding the continent from the global commercial negotiations, or believing that bilateral agreements would lead to saving multilateralism. We have to keep our role in the multilateral negotiations regarding world trade. I would like to conclude by saying that it's up to all our parties and all the citizens of the member states for the European project to be not only reconfirmed in these elections, but reconfirmed that the European Union after the elections will better serve the interests of its citizens, will better answer in a more efficient way to their needs.
You know, on the agenda, so please do not go more than the 10 minutes allocated for each speech. I want to salute and invite on stage Mrs. Violeta Tomic. She's the leading candidate for the European United Left Nordic Green Left Party. Please, Green Leaf Party. Mrs. Tomic, welcome. But the floor goes right now to Mrs. Renate Weber, a member of the European Parliament from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Doamna Weber, vă rog.
Good morning. First of all, dear colleagues and guests, please allow me to welcome you to Bucharest, and let's all of us thank the organizers for providing us such a pleasant weather, blue sky, sun, things that you do not usually see in Brussels. But since I was kindly advised by the moderator to turn to my mother tongue, I would gladly do so. So I will turn to Romanian. Please put your headphones.
I would like to thank the organizers because they managed something which is difficult to achieve as a rule, namely include important topics for the future of the EU on the agenda of this conference. I will start by saying that I was and am a fervent supporter of the European project ever since I understood immediately after 1990 what this project is about. I understood that the place of my country is within the EU, and I still believe that this is the best thing of foreign policy. Now it's no longer a matter of foreign policy that happened to Romania ever. And we have to continue being there where we belong, because we are now a few moments before the European parliamentary elections. And because hashtag is so well spread, my hashtag is Europe starts at home. At home for us is here. For you, it is there in your respective countries. If we now consider the European Union, and I like to analyze the Union beyond the achievements or drawbacks of the last years, we see that the economic and political project managed to guarantee peace on the continent for over 60 years now. If anyone believes that this is a small thing, just a trifle, it is not. For the generations who were brought up in times of peace, it's just taken for granted, but others know how important it is to have peace in order for the continent to develop, in order for any country to develop. It is a project that managed for a long time to provide welfare and good living conditions for all citizens. My colleagues mentioned a number of achievements. So I ask you, where from these feelings of Euroscepticism, anti-European attitudes? Why the mistrust of many European citizens, this mistrust concerning the EU? There must be some reasons somewhere. At the end of the day, Brexit is the ultimate illustration of this mistrust. We know that there were manipulations, etc. But beside these massive manipulations, there is part of the population in the UK that expressed their preference for exiting the EU. And my opinion is that if we ignore these negative signals, we would make a huge mistake. Because if we want to be responsible politicians, we need to identify the issues, the problems really, and find solutions for those. I think I just repeat myself when I say that the coming elections are the most important, not only for the European Parliament, but for the future of the European Union. If the forecasts of the public opinion polls become true, we will be faced with big problems, because if a quarter, more, almost a third of the European Parliament will be dominated by Eurosceptics and anti-Europeans, then we will witness blockages and deadlocks in the functioning of the EU overall. To just say, we hope this won't happen, is far from enough. So where from this mistrust of the European citizens in this construction, in this project that meant peace, prosperity, a good quality of life? In all honesty, I believe that to ignore the errors committed by the EU within the EU doesn't mean to be less pro-European. On the contrary, it means that you do appreciate this European construction and you strive for a change. And what did I notice in these years since I was a member of the European Parliament? And it's a conclusion that not only I, but my whole group drew. Too much legislation. Sometimes the legislative process is chaotic, and this excess of legislation hinders us from seeing the consequences. For a while now, we no longer have impact studies on the effects that the directives and regulations we issue might have. We also notice that sometimes the European Commission goes ahead with a micromanagement which is not entirely necessary. And this is a fact of life, and I don't think we do well if we try to hide it under the carpet. There is a bureaucracy within the European Union, a bureaucracy which is numerous and self-sufficient. This red tape triggered resentments in the European population overall. People work hard for the money they earn. And last but not least, I would try to refer to the errors when trying to impose a policy of austerity. Those measures weren't amongst the most inspired. I don't think it's any consolation for the Greeks to come after a few years and say that the austerity policy imposed was an error, was a mistake. The EU itself contributed to making this mistake, this error. Of course, overall, it is sad, because if we try to weigh the good things that happened in the EU, what the EU provided, and these are things that will continue, these way more. It is sad that we don't see many of the things that the European citizens see first. This is where reality is. The trains that arrive on time do not impress, but those that are delayed are always the subject of news. What should change within the EU for this feeling of mistrust should lower in volume? Well, a lot has been said recently of bringing the EU closer to its citizens. But I didn't see very clearly what the solutions would be for that. How could we identify the needs that the European citizens really have? And I would give you an example which I find quite interesting and which I think for the young generation is one of the reasons of discontentment. We say many times in the EU that we want, in our behavior, we want to be an example for the rest of the world. Well, in principle, this is a good idea, but in order to be a role model, in order to put tasks on the shoulders of the European citizens, I don't think this is the best possible choice. And I will give you a few examples of interest for the young people. The use of the internet, the social media. When you frighten the young Europeans with the introduction of various forms of censorship, I don't think this is the most inspired idea, because I saw protests of hundreds of thousands of people. We were even faced with a situation in which we adopted something, and then the member states got so frightened by what happened that they stepped back. So we should be less arrogant. We shouldn't consider ourselves world leaders in setting examples, because the costs are borne by the European citizens themselves. At the same time, we didn't manage to ensure the stability of jobs, for instance. There were a number of very good initiatives of the European Commission, supported financially, but they didn't prove to be sustainable. That's another problem for us. A lot has been said about the cohesion policy, and I do believe that it is very important, because at the end of the day, each member state that accessed as a member had a certain level of development, so that was known by everybody. The economic development, the social protection provided, the waves of enlargement of 2004, 2007 were moments that gave food for thought. Well, the cohesion policy should take into account a possible harmonization, because we will never ever manage to make all members equal. The developed states, of course, continue to develop themselves, but I wonder where from these protectionist ideas that I see manifest these last years. The directive of seconded employees, now the directive on transport. The consequences of these, most certainly they might have such consequences. They will eliminate, for instance, the transporters of those countries which, geographically speaking, are on the border areas of the EU. I don't think it helps us in our cohesion policy. When we discuss, we don't also take into account the development of infrastructure, including regional airports, including renewing the renewal of railway carriages, because this is the most environment-friendly solution. I cannot but see that the votes expressed last week in the European Parliament were 10 votes plus or minus in favor or against one or the other of the policies. And I will conclude now very quickly. As regards the evolution of the labor market, a lot has been said here about digitization, introduction of robots, artificial intelligence. Let me tell you that I find it strange in the times we live, because we live times of revolution. We don't have a harmonized education throughout the EU. We don't have serious and not contradictory studies on the impact of these on the labor market. Where will the European Union position itself in 10 years' time? And one other thing, the migration issues. You see, the European Union wants, and I myself want, to become a global actor. But can you be an actor when you don't have a common policy of migration? You still have 28 different such policies. It was promised since 2012 that we will sort things out. We are in 2019 and we don't have such a policy. Moreover, I've been trying for years to discuss with the decision makers in the EU the impact of digitization and robots on migration, because for years we've known that our population is aging. Therefore, we need fresh, young labor force. The most recent data show that things are changing. So, are we prepared? All these aspects, I hope, will be discussed in the Sibiu summit. This summit is organized at a time when we don't have an answer to the Brexit issue. So let me, in conclusion, tell you that the objective of any European Democrat is indeed to continue and fight for the European project. The question is whether we will manage to find in the coming months the necessary arguments in order to persuade all our citizens that this is the path to follow. I hope we'll be successful.
Weber. I've seen quite a few people submitting their cards with the questions for the debate that's going to follow this, and those cards are being collected right now. So I'm going to end this panel at 11:30, no matter what. So let's hope we'll squeeze as many questions as possible after the speeches. I'm going to invite Mr. Bas Eickhout, Vice President and leading candidate for the Greens European Free Alliance, to take the floor.
Thank you very much and good morning. And thank you for the invitation to talk about the future of EU. And I think my colleagues already posed a couple of those questions, of those issues, and maybe I just want to address one point, and that is when people are saying, why do not all the people have trust in Europe? I think one of the problems is certainly that the debate on Europe always feels so depoliticized. It's kind of, it seems, okay, we all want European cooperation. We all talk about votes in the European Parliament, which people probably have no clue about what they were. And we are not talking about our political differences. We are not making clear where the political fight is. And as long as we don't do that, and this is also for all the parliamentarians in the room, if you're not politicizing Europe, you will maintain the image that Europe is a combination of buildings instead of a combination of politicians fighting over the direction of Europe. And which direction Europe will go can be decided by the people. People in national elections, because of their ministers going to Brussels, or people voting the European Parliament and they're fighting over their political directions, which is happening in the European Parliament. But we have to show that political fight, because as long as we don't show that, people will just feel that Europe is not interesting enough to go to vote. Another reason why I think there is quite some criticism of Europe, and that is there is no ownership. Who is defending current Europe? Every 5 years, in every European election, you will hear all the political parties talking about change, a new Europe. Well, here I have to be critical, because I promised, let's politicize it a bit. I have to be critical to my colleague, Mr. Mureşan, who is also talking about change of Europe, or your lead candidate, Manfred Weber, talking about a new chapter of Europe. Let me be very clear. The Christian Democrats have been writing the entire book of Europe until now. I don't have the trust that the new chapter that Manfred Weber wants to write will be much more interesting. And that is the debate you need to have. The non-Christian Democrats applauded. But I will also be critical to Madam Weber from the Liberals, because she was saying that one of the problems of Europe was the immense amount of rules. and that people were tired of that. Is that really the case why people are tired of Europe? Or was it maybe the deregulation of the banking sector, the deregulation that caused the euro crisis? That's the reason why people felt that Europe is not delivering. And if you go to the children on the streets every Friday, marching for action on climate change, they are asking an active government to change policies. They are not asking for deregulation, they are asking for a government to act. And that's what the people are asking for, and if we don't deliver on that, then we will have disappointment again and again. So, going then to the Greens, the Green Vision, I think I will, and that's also what we're going to do in our campaign, we will restrict it to 3 main topics. For us, in this campaign, the change of Europe, the change of status quo, we want to focus on greening Europe, fighting climate change. We want a social Europe, and we want a democratic Europe. And I will go in all 3 of them. First of all, fighting climate change, a green Europe. And this is also very much linked to the theme of a new industrial agenda that is on the agenda for today. How can you discuss a future industrial agenda without talking about our future climate challenges? Europe will need to be climate neutral, will need to decarbonize its economy, not only for climate purposes, but also for geopolitical reasons. Every day, Europe is importing fossil fuels at the level of €1 billion every day, paying money to Russia and the Middle East mainly. That's what Europe is doing on a daily basis. We are a vulnerable continent. We don't have so many resources on our own. We are an import-dependent economy. So if we really want to be future-oriented, if we really want to create future jobs, we need to make sure that we are in the lead of a resource-efficient economy, a carbon-neutral economy. That's where the new green jobs are, and that's where the investments need to go on. Indeed, we need to get away from the austerity agenda that has been dominating at the European level. By the way, pushed for by the Liberals. So Mrs. Weber criticizing that austerity agenda maybe should also be very clear that it was the Liberal agenda coming from, for example, the Netherlands pushing for that austerity agenda. So that's also what happened. And that's also what we need to make clear. And there needs to be room for investment, and let's do that in creating a green economy for our future jobs. And also here, clarity of governments is very important. Just think of the crisis we had around Dieselgate, where we were too weak on the car sector. We did not uphold our regulations, and the car sector thought they could get away from it. They didn't, because it was found out in the United States, which already shows you that we were not paying attention. It was thanks to the United States that Dieselgate was found. In the end, we managed to address some of the policies on cars, but there was a huge lobby trying to say, don't put regulation on our car sector. Again, please, no regulation, asked for by the industry. Fortunately, we maintained our pressure, and fortunately, we managed to get tough CO2 standards on the new cars, and see what happened. 2 weeks ago, the CEO of Volkswagen announced that Volkswagen will now change to e-mobility, which they fought for years. And this shows, if we put the policies in place, if the car manufacturers feel that the policies are serious, they are willing to change. They are willing to create a new economy. They are willing to create new jobs. And they are willing to invest in innovation within the EU in order to prevent us from importing Chinese cars in 10 years' time. So, social Europe. A lot of talk about social Europe, but I think one very important on social Europe is really, let's make sure that the companies pay their fair levels of taxation. They have not, they are not until now. And there's one big reason, because Europe doesn't get its act together to act on taxation. The consequence is a race to the bottom. Levels of corporate taxation over the last 20 years in Europe, on average, has declined from 35% to more or less 20%. And that's a downward trend. Companies paying less and less taxation. It's not even only about tax avoidance. These are just the real levels of taxation going down. The consequence is that all governments will raise taxation on other sources, quite often labor, which is a stupid thing to do if you want to create jobs, or they have to cut their expenditures, and that's most of the time social expenditures. And that's a trend that we are seeing. If we don't change that trend, you can talk whatever you want on social Europe, but it will not happen. So also their fundamental change. But then we also finally have to talk about a democratic Europe. Very important. And sometimes you have the discussion, the rule of law, is that not a national issue? Let me be very clear. The rule of law are the fundamentals. It's the basis of our democratic society. If we don't uphold the rule of law within each European country, we will eat away the trust in a democratic system, which will hit us all in the end economically. This is our core basis. And this is where Europe needs to be tough on every country, without any political play. And also here Europe has failed. Europe has made rule of law a party political issue. Being tough on Poland because the Polish government is not a member of two of the big groups. And being weak on Hungary because the Hungarian government is from the Christian Democrats. But we're also too weak on Romania. And we are here in Romania, and I'm very happy to be here, but we are very much concerned about the developments in Romania. And certainly the fight against corruption. The fight against corruption is key, because if we don't fight corruption, if we let that happen, people will not have trust in their democratic institutions. And that is one of the vital threats that we need to address. And therefore, what the Romanian government is doing with Laura Kövesi needs to be addressed and needs to be criticized. That she's not even allowed to talk to the press, medium of freedom of media, that's so core to our values, that she's not even allowed to talk to the press is a big problem and should be addressed also when we are discussing the future of Europe. And you can be assured that we Greens will fight for this green Europe, for a social Europe, but also this democratic Europe. Because without our democratic values, we can talk about any future economy, but it will in the end mean nothing if we don't uphold our democratic values for every country, and that is key as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eickhout, for a very well-structured speech. Thank you for staying in the 10 minutes boundaries. And thank you for giving us a nice taste of that political debate that goes on in Brussels and Strasbourg in the European Parliament. Now I give the floor to an aspiring member of the European Parliament, the leading candidate for the European United Left and Nordic Green Left, Mrs. Violeta Tomic.
Thank you very much. I have to admit that I completely agree with Mr. Bas. So, dear colleagues, political representatives, and dear all, thank you to the Joint Committee's initiative in organizing this event and for inviting me to talk about the future of European Union. Given the economic crisis we have witnessed over the past decades and the shameful way in which the EU reacted on it, it is urgent to talk about the future of the European project. Europe stands on the crossroads, to be social or to exist no more. Capital and EU technocrats shrink the space of democratic decision-making and impose neoliberal policies that, like a mirror image, respond to the rising of the extreme right, which is fed by the rage and hopelessness of those whom neoliberal globalization is leaving behind. The time when the errors of EU operating system could be fixed by installing correction patches is long gone. Without thorough structural changes, the EU has no future. Just an ambition plan of renovation will enable us to defend the civilization achievements of democracy and social justice of the state, and to avoid slipping into the darkness of nationalism and racial hatred. This leads me to one of the key topics of this debate, and its role is of reshaping the EU, the fourth industrial revolution. This transformation is one of the key reasons why we absolutely need a new economic model and the creation of sustainable, just, and good faith relations, not only between the countries of the European continent, but the world more widely. When we think about reshaping the European Union, there is one fundamental principle that must be upheld. Power must belong to the people. In Brussels, I saw a lot of huge buildings, but very little democracy. It was during the crisis that democracy was suspended. EU citizens did not have any say in how the crisis should be resolved. Together with democracy, the principles of welfare state were also attacked and devalued. Billions of our hard-earned money was used to bail out banks, funds, and the reckless speculators of the financial sector with cuts into the healthcare, school system, social system, pensions, and salaries, transferred from the poor onto the rich and from the periphery to the center. After 10 years of this neoliberal offensive by the European elites, we should not be surprised that peace and stability is now under threat. A nationalist reaction to the European Union has spread through the continent. The spirit of new breed of fascism has been let out of the bottle. The source of many of these problems is a non-democratic European Union framework where the only democratically elected institution, the European Parliament, has no power of legislative initiative. The only thing we were asked lately is, should we switch the clock or not? I find it very pathetic. And my clock didn't know that Romania has 1 hour even more. So, decisive power is played out by technocrats, institutions such as an European Central Bank, which is completely out or cut off from democratic control of Eurozone. The ECB is a law into itself. In this context, then, what hope does the fourth industrial revolution offer in terms of changing the circumstances for the 99%? Not much. Not unless we change the whole system. The neoliberal capitalist system runs on exploitation and the unjust redistribution of wealth. The rich are rich because the poor are poor. It is simple as that. The 1%, the richest, are the ones who benefit from the hard work of the working poor. They are the sole beneficiaries of technological development. Let's look at our everyday life. Science and technology have advanced enormously in recent years. This itself is good. We live longer and better than our ancestors did. So one would assume, okay, great, we get to work less. But is it really so? Instead of working less, people now work more and harder for less pay. And why? Because as well as material goods and natural resources, the benefits of technological development, the accumulated knowledge of humankind throughout all this evolution remains privatized. It is not a common good. It is a copy-protected, copyrighted, secured under lock and key by big corporate interests and rich individuals who are raking in the cash. But human-made accumulated knowledge should belong to everybody. On the other hand, we hear alarming prognoses about robots replacing humans and stealing their jobs. How will people earn money if they will not work? Well, in the same way as 1% earns money now without working and benefits from the work of others. But with a major difference, no humans will be exploited. The fourth industrial revolution is therefore an opportunity to revolutionize the concept of work so that finally we can benefit from the work of machines, robots, and artificial intelligence. Like the present, such a future requests the redistribution of wealth from the wealthiest to the most vulnerable, the introduction of minimum social standards, and the protection of labor rights, pensions, and social welfare. A European minimum wage must be achieved in each country. The minimum wage should at least be 20% above minimum costs of living, like my party, the left, implements in Slovenia. Whether we need to change our economic model is not in doubt. Technological development and justice demand it. But the other main reason for radical change is the economic system is our planet. We are destroying our planet at an ever-increasing rate. We are drawn into plastic. Last decade, we were focused on economic crisis. Populists want to focus us on migrant crisis, but we all forget about the most serious and dangerous crisis which affect us all, even rich and poor, and those from center and periphery. This is environmental crisis. The movement of Global Fridays for Future, the movement of Greta, is doing an incredible job in making adults and decision makers listen to their call for urgent action. These teenagers give me much to be optimistic about. More power to them. On the last discussion topic on this conference related to the European neighborhood, Balkans, European partnership and Euro-Atlantic relations. EU can be enlarged in Balkans, but just in the honest, democratic and respectful way, with equal standards, helping undeveloped countries to develop, because we do not want EU of double standards, EU of two speeds, which we are facing already, when the countries of the periphery are the field of exploitation of resources, the working rights, and the polygon of the dirty industries. Balkans is very vulnerable, and it must be handled in a proper way. I came from Balkans, and I was born in Sarajevo. Of course, we had our problems, but we wanted to resolve them alone, without external interference. But the great powers did not follow the policy of neutrality. So we were facing a terrible civil war when half of my family simply disappeared. Thus, speaking personally, and for the European left, we don't want NATO. It is an absolute alliance that continues to generate and carry out imperialist military interventions. By no means that it does safeguard peace. What Europe needs is a new comprehensive peace and security system in dialogue with and not in a Cold War-style confrontation, USA with Russia. We are all responsible for what happens in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. We defend peace and political dialogue against violence and military coercion. We defend internationalism in contrast to imperialism. We defend cooperation between countries and peoples, not division. We seek unity against the neoliberal capitalist crisis which oppresses millions. Instead of joint army, PSCO, EU should invest into things being important for the citizens to improve their quality of life, like a joint fast railways. Invest into science and research, into green jobs, abolition of poverty, into a Green Deal. Yes, Europe needs to change, urgently. We need democratization of decision-making, we need social security, justice, and equal distribution of material, natural, and intellectual goods. We need a new, just, and sustainable green economic model, and we need peace. We need a Europe that puts people and the planet before profit. A Europe for millions, not millionaires. A Europe of people, not capital. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tomic. Now I give the floor to our last key speaker of the panel, and then we'll start the debate. So, Mr. Nicolas Bay, co-president and leading candidate for the Europe of Nations and Freedom. He'll be addressing us in French.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your welcome here in Bucharest. I would like to start by thanking Gabriela Crețu, who took the initiative of organizing this conference. We are now within less than 2 months from the elections. We are members of the national parliamentaries and of the European Parliament. The time has come for us to discuss the issues of tomorrow's Europe. The Romanian presidency took over this initiative. I have lived 3 presidencies, Austria, Bulgaria, and yours, Romania's presidency, so 3 presidencies. And I have to admit that given the difficult circumstances in pre-elections, the Romanian presidency of the Council shows not only dynamism, but also it is an active presidency. We are all happy to see this happening because we need all to hear the voices, the Council, the Commission, that have democratic legitimacy and considerable powers. Our group is made of about 40 MEPs, and we hope to see an even larger number of MEPs. Our political enemies expressed worrying ideas. I'd like to thank them for the ideas expressed. I thought some of them were aimed at me and some of my colleagues. I'm thinking of Slovakia, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, my colleagues from there, I think the European elections will be an opportunity for the peoples of Europe to vote not against Europe. No one is against Europe, but against a certain vision, a certain approach. I think there is this ease and intellectual comfort, and I won't mention here the word mediocrity, but apparently there seems to be this perception that there are two visions, a positive vision of those that defend the EU and want to militate for federalism, and the populists who want to destroy Europe. We don't want to destroy Europe. We also believe in the EU. We know that there is a community of civilizations in Europe. We have a common culture. We have great, important challenges to counterbalance: identity, borders, challenges on food security and safety, the protection of data, artificial intelligence. All these require common and joint response. The point is to understand how the EU will be more efficient, allowing the European nations to shine over the planet as it knew to do so throughout its history, and how the EU community, with the help of successive treaties, managed to fulfill this role. The EU shouldn't be mistaken for Europe, but now we have institutions that are faced with a sort of powerlessness. So the peoples need to have the last say in defending democracy and building the Europe we all want. United in diversity, this is one of the mottos of the EU. But now the functioning of the EU deprives nations of the possibility to express their unique features, what makes the very strength of Europe. I think there are three building sites that we should mention here, three projects that invite us to reconsider. First of all, the organization of European institutions. Should we continue to have a commission that has the essence of power in its hands? It issues directives, regulations, and then the control of the implementation and the transposition in the national legislative frameworks. And this means the interference in the political nations, the political approach. Romania knows something about it. Hungary and Poland are now the victims. And should we accept that the European Commission, that has not been elected directly by the people, decides instead of a government which has the authority and legitimacy to make decisions? Here in Romania, there is a government in power, and Mr. Boștinaru, you know well that we're not on the same wavelength, but I respect all governments, and I don't think the Commission or other governments of France, of Germany, or Spain are entitled to give lessons to Romania about the state of law. Or to criticize the legislative and judicial system in Romania. We all try to strike the right balance between a judiciary organization that respects the rights of the people to defend themselves, so justice will be implemented, but at the same time, there should be separation of powers. And as a French citizen, I would never allow myself to judge the Romanian system or the Polish system, knowing that the French system itself is not superior in any way. So what is important currently is to accept these differences. We shouldn't have European commissioners that want uniformity, because this is the end of Europe. If we continue to build federalism and everything should be decided by the 28 or 27, then that will mark the end of Europe. So what peoples no longer want is to be kept at a distance from the democratic processes. And this is precisely what is happening now, and we should think about it. And the modification of the treaties should happen in such a way that the democratic institutions should be given more powers, and the direct implementation should not be checked necessarily by the Commission. I know that we have a limited number of minutes, but I still have 2 points. Identity and security. Europe should be capable of defining its values, its history, its culture, as well as its geographical area. These last years, we were faced with the migratory crisis. We should protect our borders. I know that in Romania there is this strong will to become a member of Schengen, and I understand that. The general lowering of all controls between the member countries of the EU, associated with the fact that we never had the will or the means to protect the external borders, put us in circumstances that lead us to no longer being capable to face mass migration, because this has an economic and social impact. We should be capable of protecting our external borders. This is a sine qua non condition or prerequisite. Accepting a limited number of citizens in the EU space or area. And the economic aspects. How can Europe become an important global actor when there are power pools such as the USA or China, and they are capable to protect themselves, while EU seems to be a place with its gates wide open. The customs union and all the others should be used in such a way as to protect our area. We treat the free trade negotiations in such a way that this will lead to the end, the death of our industry, while the USA make investments, they negotiate with the rest of the world, but they protect their own industries. We should do the same on behalf, also on behalf of the principle of environment protection. I do want to protect the planet, but a total free change with Canada, with other countries, with Japan, Singapore, treaties that were signed with the countries of Oceania. Products will be manufactured in China or in Asia, generally speaking, and they will be sold in Europe. This is the most anti-eco-friendly model, the unfriendliest model. All individual cars, even the old diesel cars, will continue to pollute the continent. The need to relocate human activities on the European continent, this is an economic imperative, and it is the only efficient means to defend and to protect our environment. Ladies and gentlemen, as a conclusion, I would like to say that the European peoples can make this choice between defending themselves, protecting themselves, proving to be capable to have a dialogue with the rest of the world. We are not anti-EU. We believe in the dialogue with the other peoples. 15 years ago, I attended a conference in the same building, a few hundred meters away from here. The building is huge. And we spoke of the cooperation with Africa, the firmness we need to adopt in terms of migration, because only this means true partnership with Africa. If we are not firm with ourselves here in Europe, we won't be able to have a partnership with Africa. Let's not forget that China invests massively in Africa, in places that were Europe's positions in the past. So we have to regulate the migratory flows. The African continent, the infrastructures, the telecommunications, the electric power supply, all these are necessary for the development of Africa. But the essence of the economic policy is to grant subsidies to African countries, and this is a policy adopted by the Commission. Generally, these aids fall into the hands of the multinationals. So I would like to say that there is no populist danger. There is only the opportunity, the chance of the European peoples to contribute to the construction of the EU of tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you for this vivacious expression of opinions. We have only, and now we have
10 minutes for 5 questions. Can we do that? So I'll need very brief, short answers and also very brief and succinct questions. So, George Lăpădat.
Vă mulțumesc, o să încerc.
I will speak Romanian because it is an official European language. Throughout the speeches of the morning, I heard about investments. So, can we speak of uniformity and centralization of the education policies throughout the EU?
More questions. Okay, I got it. We go to Netherlands then. Hi, Veldman.
Dear colleagues, I could mention several topics. For example, the importance of the rule of law or subsidiarity, but let me focus on one topic. I would like to point out the importance of transparency about the EU decision-making process to our citizens. 2 years ago, the Dutch Parliament took the initiative to open up this black box and to disclose essential information about governments' positions and voting results within the Council and Eurogroup, but also to create more openness about trilogues to which the European Parliament participates as well. This initiative was supported by a majority of national parliaments. Unfortunately, the Council is not eager for swift improvements, it seems. So additional attention and action is required. That is why I call upon the Member States to include transparency as one of the top EU priorities in the strategic agenda for the next legislative cycle after the European elections. So my question for the representatives of the European political parties, how do you view this proposal if you share the ambition for more transparency in the EU? Which action do you see to enlarge transparency? Thank you in advance for your comments.
Thank you. Mrs. Berta Cabral.
I'm here. Please, first of all, I want to congratulate the Romanian presidency and all the speakers of this panel. 2 notes, subsidiarity and cohesion. About subsidiarity, I should say that Europe is not just European institutions. European means citizens. So the declaration of Bragan's and the recommendations of the task force created by President Juncker must be taken into account and must be part of the new interinstitutional agreement that will be drawn after the European elections. Because member states, regions and municipalities must be involved in the process legislation. About cohesion, I want to say that is cohesion policy, without it, there is no union within the union. It is a win-win policy, as some of you have said. So we know that Europe has many challenges, but it's important to not forget cohesion policy. I'm a member of Portuguese Parliament and I came from Azores. I'm elected by Azores, an ultra-peripheral region. And it's important for ultra-peripheral region to maintain the cohesion policy. It is essential to ensure the social and economic cohesion of these regions, because it's important to improve the level of resources for Azores and Madeira, to improve the cohesion policy, the common agriculture policy, the common fisheries policy, and POSEI funds. The European Parliament has realized this and voted for the nominal maintenance. But the Commission should be concerned about it, but maintain a strong cohesion policy to reduce the gap of less developed economies and to mitigate the permanent asymmetries of these ultra-peripheral regions of Europe. I should say that subsidiarity and solidarity must be present in all European future policies. I would like your comments about this, please.
Thank you very much. Janice Dombrava, I think I pronounced it correct. I hope so. Yes, please.
Dear members of national parliaments, it is important to underline that European nations, their cultures and language are the most important values that we need to protect. This is the core of Europe. Unfortunately, we can't see EU policies that deal with very important problems. Europe is the only region in the world where we see negative birth rates. Within Europe, we see massive depopulation of Eastern Europe due to migration. But EU institutions turn blind eyes on these problems. EU can't replace Europeans with migrants from third countries. We need to support our families. I'm against chauvinism and imperialism. Many nations have been oppressed by imperial regimes, mine country included. But I can't understand why many politicians attack nationalism. National identity, culture and language is preserved thanks to nationalism. That is the reason why I can't support declarations or speakers who attack the rise of nationalism. Dear colleagues, we need strong Europe in the time when Russian imperialists have their troops in other European countries, Georgia, Ukraine, Transnistria region, and I can't accept double standards. From one side, EU nations condemn aggression, but at the same time, some nations try to strike a deal with Gazprom. We speak of strong Europe, but only UK, Baltic countries, Poland, Romania, and Greece spend 2% from GDP on defense. If we want to defend peace and European values, every nation and EU should act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please formulate your questions a little bit shorter if possible. I don't know, when do we stop and how do we answer? Because all right, I got it. Mrs. Kretsu, Mrs. President, well, she knew that if I make a mistake, it'll be her blame, and she gives me advice. You please stay with us for the following afternoon, and maybe we can address these issues in the next panels. But let's take one more question right now from Bernard Durkan. Please, short.
Microphone.
Yeah.
Some of the ideas put forward have been tried before and failed. What I believe we now need is a new vision for Europe, a redefining the vision that set about the formation of the modern Europe when Monnet and Schuman and others sat down from the ashes of the past and decided to create a future of hope, of cooperation, of compassion. And let me finish by saying this, and I put this out as a challenge. Some of the economic theories, in fact all of the economic theories, that allegedly have failed in the modern Europe, their alternatives have also failed, both in the past and in more recent times.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clive Solly.
Thank you. And first of all, can I say, sorry, we are leaving the European Union, but we want it to succeed. I voted Remain. I wasn't surprised by the outcome, and the views I'd like to put to, or the questions I'd like to put to the panel, concern really the idea of greater government, which was put forward by the President of the Romanian Senate, and also to Ms. Weber, who talked about the importance of mistrust, because one of the most powerful things in the argument about Brexit was the strapline, the advertisement, if you like, by the Brexiteers of take back control. Take back control didn't just mean about immigration, that was a factor, but in my view it wasn't the major factor. The bigger factor was that we couldn't sack the government and we couldn't make our own laws. The future for Europe has to address those issues. It has to be a political issue around those issues, because the British have always seen the advantage of a supermarket. They've always been worried about a super state. And that is one of the issues that has to be discussed. My final point and question, in a sense, is can you all please make sure that the United Kingdom and the European Union work together on future problems? Because, frankly, Britain needs Europe, and Europe needs Britain. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Corlățean.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief. First of all, I'd like to thank all the distinguished panelists for their extremely interesting, sometimes challenging contribution, but it's very good to be like this. My question was inspired by one comment made by the Vice President of SLD, Mr. Boștinaru, that made reference to the common security and defense policy of the European Union, to NATO, and to what was considered many years a strategic alliance between Europe and the United States. My question is addressed to all the panelists. I've heard already one answer, and this question is addressed to all the other panelists, but mainly to the spokesperson of the EPP. Do you think that this strategic alliance between Europe and the United States became less relevant and will become less relevant in the next years? Or are we looking also on the real security challenges on the eastern flank or eastern border of the European Union? How do you see, what is your vision on this topic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corlățean. Mr. Jaroslav Obremski.
When we start to think about future and next step of integration, I suggest to repair something and do something what was noticed by Renata Weber, do something with mistrust of citizens. The first question, in which way we can limit it, not democratic process of making decision in Brussels. European commissioners are more politicians than servants of 27 countries. Brussels is not transparency, first of all, in the level of lobbying of the greatest European companies. The second question, in which way we can stop protectionism? Frankly speaking, first of all, in French version, for our point of view, EU should be the zone of freedom, also freedom of services. And the third question, in which way we should come back for looking for a consensus, not dictate the strongest against weakened countries. The crisis of Greece was, I think, good example that we have the problem with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Crețu forfeits her question. Jean-Jacques Flau. No? Okay.
Just a second.
Yeah, I think you should.
That one needs to go.
No, one more time. This is, no, come on.
Switch off there.
Ça fonctionne? Voilà. Je tiens à
I would like to thank to the Romanian presidency for the presidency of the European Council, because thus we concentrate on the member states. It's a positive aspect. Each country has the chance to work more for the Europe when holding the presidency. I have two remarks regarding the state of law. I regret that the European Union has not the means in order to fight, in order to comply the state of law in each member state. It happened that in Poland, Hungary, and unfortunately in Romania. Secondly, the deficit that we feel, the trust deficit that we feel in Europe, it's not caused totally by the protection attitude of Europe. We have to say this. And also I would like to address to Mr. Bay, especially sometimes we criticize the European Union. We say that it does not protect enough, but in the same time we don't have the means for implementing the necessary practices. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe I mispronounced your name, sorry. Are you Mr. Bekar?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I represent the country which is not the member of the European Union, but I represent the country which biggest aspiration is to become the member of European Union. But it does not matter if we become the member or not. We are dedicated to the values of European Union. But the question is, what kind of the value? Because in my understanding, initially, Europe was based on the value of freedom, peace, solidarity, and consensus. But Europe is removing now oneself from these values, and this is the biggest problem, I think. If it will happen, then European Union as a unique project, unique project of solidarity will lose its attractiveness in the eyes of another people which are not the member of European Union. That's why I think that we have, because I feel myself as a European, we have to come back to values which are founding values for European Union, and we have to be more politicized, as it was mentioned here, and not have the approach of technocrats which dominate at the moment European politics. And I have one question regarding crisis, regarding refugee crisis. Why European Union are not investing more in the countries where the crises appear and where from the countries the refugees are coming to EU, and only talk about anti-immigrant policies and how to deal with the immigrants in European Union when they arrive already. You have to invest, I think, more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, I suggest like this. You choose, each of you, to answer an issue addressed here, and maybe you will have time in the afternoon to answer the rest of them. So, Mr. Mureșan, do you want to take
Yes,
okay,
thank you very much. One word on education, which was the first question, harmonizing and so on. Education is a national competence currently, and in many countries it's a regional competence, particularly in federal states, and there is good reasons for this. What I want to say is, although within this legal framework we have done a lot through exchanges of best practices. Look, for example, the countries with the smallest youth unemployment rate, they have something in common. For example, dual vocational education system. We have done a lot to try to adapt and apply that to other member states. And we were successful with this. Then Erasmus, opportunities for exchange for young people, coordinating our curricula through the Bologna process, bachelor, master, and so on. So although this is a national competence, a lot was done. One word on transparency. We, the European Parliament, I believe we are highly transparent. every single minute of every plenary debate can be followed live online and then would be stored there. Every single minute of every of our committee meetings can be followed live online and is then stored there. What we can do better is be more creative and closer to the citizen in promoting what we are doing. And there, of course, we have to adapt our language, make it simpler, be more interactive, more attractive, and so on. The problem lies particularly with the Council, which is much less transparent. I would be in favor of having public sessions of the Council where ministers, just before they make a debate, it is seen publicly, as is the case with the plenary of the Parliament, but we would need your support there, because you, as members of national parliaments, are best placed to put pressure on the governments to try to change this. And generally, when we speak about Europe, in very many member states, the politicians that people are looking to are the prime ministers, are the ministers, and it's the members of national parliaments. It's you. So when it comes to the future of Europe, to everything that we discussed here, you know, you are a very important ally to us. And then just to conclude, the direct question addressed to me by Mr. Kolodzian, and thank you very much for the question. He asked me whether in these challenging times the partnership with the US is eventually less relevant. I believe it's highly relevant. It is as relevant as it has always been. My true belief is that Europe would not be free and united as it is today without the strong engagement of the United States in Europe. Western Europe would not have been free after the Second World War, and Eastern Europe would not have been free after the end of the Cold War without NATO, without our partnership with the United States. There are challenging times there, but I believe it's as relevant as ever. And particularly if I see the rise of autocrats in China or Turkey drifting more and more away from European standards, I believe that particularly as we are here in Bucharest, it is in our fundamental interest as Romanians that the United States and Europe cooperate as close as possible together.
Thank you for your answers, Mr. Mureșan. We are on the hill of time here. I'm eating away all the coffee break. So, Mrs. Tomic, yeah, you will all have a chance. Very brief, please. One topic.
Concerning the transparency, I should say that it is one of our primary goals, of course, and top priorities. I already signed the International Transparency Declaration, and first of all, the lobbyists which are around European Commission should be somehow to have some information about them, to put them in some order, because we know that they are writing laws actually. So to ask about nationalism and more the population of the East, as the young man said, yes, it is the problem, definitely, but it is the problem of Europe of two speeds. The cohesion funds should be invested into the Eastern countries, and it is not, nationalism is not bad as nationalism to save the country, but it cannot be excluded, but just inclusive with the people. We have to find solutions together, and the problem of migrants we should solve at the very origin. We are part of NATO, which make this crisis appearing, and I don't agree that NATO is saving our lives and it is kind of guardian of peace. We are all responsible for the wars which happened in Syria, Libya, Iran, Afghanistan, and we have to take responsibility for it. And there are many things to be fight. For example, the crisis of environment we have to face together and not just one by one. So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please focus on one topic because we don't have any more time. Mr. Boștinaru.
Thank you very much. I will start from the rule of law question, l'état de droit, qui était présenté par notre cher
introduced by our dear French colleague.
Forget what we have as the fundamentals of our union. It's first the Constitution, and based on the Constitution, the way the state entities are functioning. And my question to you will be, do you have in France secret protocols between DST and the prosecution? If so, tell us, and then we shall copy your model. The second, do you have joint prosecutions in France? Je ne me souviens pas que jamais toute l'histoire, la France a eu une équipe mixte entre le service secret.
I don't think there are mixed services between and as regards the Romanian gendarmerie, that was a topic discussed in the European Parliament, and I remember how the Romanian gendarmerie that was set up with the support of France. An older general helped us. They said that we acted legally. And where's the difference between the French gendarmerie and the Romanian gendarmerie, the way in which they react? If you have this, please tell us. I only want to say that beside the abstract discourse, there is this will to consider a single approach or generalize in order to condemn a country or another in a way in which you like to do it. And I will conclude with this.
Basic principles of any democracy, and I have to tell you something. All Romanian laws, from the penal to the civil code, were inspired by France and by the French laws. Why you don't check the substance of the law and then tell us what is better? Thank you.
Mulțumesc, domnule Boștinaru. Doamna...
Is there a continuity between what was said? Thank you so much. I do agree with some of the ideas expressed by my Romanian colleague. No system is perfect, and the state of law should be assessed taking into account the constitution and the legislative framework. It's not the technocrats in Brussels who should assess the fundamental rights. The EU, the European continent, tends to risk conflicts that are not necessary. The independence on the Russian gas should lead us to more prudence and more balance. There are interests which aren't necessarily ours, and sometimes these interests are contradictory. We have to protect our interests, and the United States shouldn't become a sort of guardian of Europe. We are capable of defending ourselves. The USA have measures of protection of their economic interests, and we should do the same. We shouldn't stay limited to the current model. The trends of the 80s and 90s should be left behind. And very quickly, the UK position. Our colleague spoke of the partnership with the EU in the future. I don't want my country to go outside, to exit the EU. I think reforms are necessary inside. I respect the British choice. We need a strong economic partnership. Unfortunately, in the negotiations between Brussels and Theresa May, the economic partnership was not discussed. The Irish border was discussed and other issues. The result is the blockage that we now witness. Michel Barnier and Theresa May, that negotiated the exit treaty, had divergent positions. But in practice, what they want is to still have the UK in all the structures of the EU, but no representation in the Parliament, in the Commission and the Council. And our colleague from Belgium, now I will answer him. You say that the citizens have the feeling that Europe does not protect them. But it's not a feeling, it's a fact of life. The EU is a very open space. And this model is not copied anywhere in Europe. We need more economic protection, more customs protection at the level of the whole continent. The federalism of Europe is considered a sort of total liberalization. But Europe should be strong and independent.
Then stay with it and fulfill all the speeches.
Exactly.
Donna Weber, please.
Thank you. On education, I will only make a comment. As long as there are studies showing that 65% of the children today will work on jobs that we do not even conceive that they will exist, of course we have to change the paradigm on education. So yes, we should have something which is pan-European as an approach how we want to teach these children. So I know that it's based now on subsidiarity, but I think this is a very wrong idea and we should change it entirely. On transparency, absolutely. Don't forget that we went to the European Court of Justice with the Council because of the lack of transparency in Council behavior. But we should require also the same transparency of the European Commission when, for example, suddenly, literally from the morning to the evening, the Chief of Cabinet, Mr. Selmayr of Mr. Juncker, becomes the Secretary General of the Commission, and then we have resolutions in the European Parliament and reports of the European Ombudswoman. So yes, transparency is indeed something that we need. On the rule of law, just one thing. Since 2010, the ALDE group in the European Parliament asked for an objective mechanism that would evaluate each member state at its time. We still don't have it, and it's 2019. And now, at least in Germany, from what I know, they are campaigning exactly on how to get rid of subjective interpretation and come with something that is objective. Because, for example, last week, we voted a resolution on Malta and Slovakia. And it was only at that time that I personally learned that in Malta is the Prime Minister who appoints the judges. Oh my God, if this existed in Romania, that the General Prosecutor is the personal advisor of the Prime Minister. But nobody so far spoke about this, so double standards must be ended, and something objective must be put in place. In the case of Mrs. Kövesi, it's an independent prosecutor. The decision of an independent prosecutor will be reviewed by the court, by the High Court. So it's not Romania as a whole or the government that can decide on such situations. Really, I mean, how many times did you see in the European Parliament that you asked in a country to stop an investigation? I have no idea what is in that file because normally it's confidential. But we do have the rule of law mechanisms. And do not forget that when we speak about the fundamental values, and I'm very happy that the Union is founded on these values, we are talking about rule of law, respect for human rights and fundamental rights, and for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weber. Mr. Eickhout.
Yeah, still much can be said. I will be very brief on the rule of law because I opened that as well. Let me just say one thing. There is an independent analysis of the reforms in Romania done by the Venice Committee, and they are very critical. So if you are really saying we are open to that, then implement all the recommendations of the Venice Committee. Let me put that very simple. Secondly, the discussion on nationalism versus Europe. I think the people who are asking the question were already making very clear how difficult it is. Our colleague from Latvia, Mr. Dombrava, you were saying nationalism has done good things, and at the same time you also were criticizing the Gazprom decision. So there you want a stronger Europe to do something about the Gazprom decision by Germany, or not. But then you cannot complain about a German decision on Gazprom. It's either or, and it's the same for my Polish colleague, Mr. Obrensky. He's also complaining about Brussels, but at the same time he wants freedom of services, which is that a debate that needs to take place in Brussels and will be a political compromise. So you have an opinion there, but you cannot go against Brussels if at the same time you expect a lot of Brussels. That's always the problem with nationalism. They do expect a lot of Brussels when it's in their interest, and otherwise it's just complaining. Maybe a point to our Lord. I think the biggest problem is that the Brits always thought that Europe is only a supermarket. That's the problem. The Brits were never told that Europe is more than a supermarket. It is also a union of values. It is also a union where social issues are being debated. And as long as we as politicians are not honest about that, then indeed you can get the backlash that we have seen, unfortunately, in the United Kingdom. Maybe a last point, because it was on cohesion policies. And yes, I think it's very important, but can I just please address my national colleagues? Because I see a repetition of a debate going on. And this is, you know, when my Dutch colleague is talking about transparency, I fully support. We fought for a more transparent dealing of lawmaking in the European Parliament, and we still need to improve on the trilogue. So absolutely, good fight. But at the same time, unfortunately, the Dutch government is also asking for less money at the European level. If you keep on pushing for that, then of course the reaction on the other side will be, okay, but then I'll keep my agriculture money, and the others, we will keep our cohesion money. And every reform, every modernization that is so crucial of our budget will not happen. So please start fighting for modernization of the European budget so that the cohesion policies, which are so important, can be really future-oriented and we can be really proud of where the money goes to. And then, yes, the price to pay might be maybe for once to focus a bit less on that it should be less money. If we agree on that all together, we can maybe finally have a future-oriented deal on the budget of the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for a wonderful, wonderful panel.